Welcome to Ready Layer 2 with me, Small. This is a podcast for the founders, innovators, and experimenters building the future of Web3 on Arbitrum. Hey everybody, you're listening to Ready Layer 2. I'm your host, Small, and today I'm closing a loop that actually opened up on the very first day that I announced this show on Twitter. I put out a tweet just explaining what I was doing here. I had a nice response. One of the people that reached out, Birchie.small, suggested that I don't just talk to the technical folks and make sure that I get some of the designers and illustrators and artists on here as well, which of course I thought was a fantastic idea. And one of the people that he suggested was OBLOMOV, and that's who I'm finally getting to talk to today. So OBLOMOV, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much. Nice to get to talk to everybody. I haven't done anything yet with my voice, so this is the first time I'm making an appearance as far as chatting with the community.
First cool. Voice performance. I'm glad to be here for it, man. That's awesome. So thanks for taking the time. Yeah. I appreciate it. And yeah, like I said, super excited to close this loop. We've been talking for a long time, and I've enjoyed getting to know you a little bit online, and I've really enjoyed your work. And that's what we're gonna get into all of it. Could you just share with the audience a little bit about your background in getting into, I'll say Arbitrum specifically. If you want to talk about crypto generally, you can, but really curious about how you landed in the Arbitrum ecosystem and then got rolling with the smalls and everything else.
Yeah, so I got in crypto back in, I honestly heard about it in 2013. My aunt was one of the people who actually came to me at the time and said, oh, is Bitcoin a thing? And I was like, I don't think the world's ready for a digital currency. And I was like, oh, it's a sketch. And at the time, the only people who could really transact with it were making their own wallets out of code. And it seemed super risky. So yep. I, of course, was naive. And then I became Bitcoin pilled in 2017. And then that was when I got heavy into the market with a couple friends. So Stinky, I don't know if you've seen him in my Discord and stuff, but he's my real life friend. And he's also a coder, so he does that professionally. But he's one of the guys who's helped me out with a lot of my contracts and different stuff that we're doing. So I've known him since high school, really. So quite a few years that we've been friends. And then we ended up moving on from the 2017, 2020 bull runs, all those kind of things. We've been hanging out since then. And when everyone was really getting into NFTs in 2020/2021, that was when there was a lot of, basically anyone would buy anything. You could stick it to the wall and there was like hype around anything that had generative traits. Yep. It was just like, it didn't really matter what it was. Like literally people were doing the whole rock thing and all that stuff back in that day. And it was intense, man. It was a little ridiculous, but that was when I started to look for what else was going on, because it was not just here's a JPEG, it was what other kind of stuff is happening with NFTs. And that's where I saw the small group doing their thing, where they actually had the portraits that would evolve. And that was a really neat idea, in my opinion, because I hadn't seen something like that before. So that was really what got me started on smalls and into the Arbitrum kind of verse of things.
Gotcha. Very cool. Now, were you an artist already, a creator in that sense, or when did that all start?
I drew. I used to draw all through high school, college. I always was into drawing kind of creepy, weird, black and white, pencil, graphite kind of stuff. That's always just been something I did. And then I got into watercolor a little bit in high school. And then from there, I was always interested in tech. So like in high school, I was doing like physics engine software and that kind of stuff. CAD was another one that I used just for designing and building things out. I just enjoyed that kind of environment. And applying that together, when I learned about Blender about 3 years ago, that was really the first time where I was like, oh, these kind of meet. I can do all the things with art and color and texture that I want, while also being able to do and manipulate things in terms of physical dimension and having some sort of feel. And you can make something look squishy and you can make something have a certain kind of value to it. I don't know. I really liked it. I liked that idea, and I got immediately super into Blender, and then ended up building a whole computer rig and everything else, and just taking on every single tutorial I could for it. And yeah, that's what brought me to where I'm at now with Blender stuff.
Very cool. Very cool. So that ultimately turns into some NFT projects that you launched yourself. So tell me about the progression there. Were you kind of, I know there was a lot going on. So you were messing around with like smalls and some kind of backstory stuff, and you had some like lab thing going on. Was that before or after you launched an actual project?
It was before.
It was before. Okay. Before. So tell me about that. Because one of the things we got talking about, just to catch the audience up here before we got on, was just about how in the Arbitrum space, and in particular, like the people in the Smolverse and the games and everything else, that just seems to be a good, fun community, even when everything's going to hell everywhere, especially like crypto Twitter's going to
Exactly.
hell and the market's going to hell. Like you can always count on there's some good fun being had in Smolverse and in crypto Twitter, or at least Arbitrum Twitter and Treasure Twitter. So we want to talk about the community aspect of it there, because you were contributing to it with some of these kind of quirky art pieces and weird stories. So tell us about that.
Yeah. I think that was part of what drew me to Smalls is that they immediately had such a community, and it was the Smallverse people and everyone around John Patton and everything that was going on in Treasure's Discord. It was so lively, and everyone was there to support each other. It was all positive vibes kind of stuff. It was that in light of it being dark times outside. To be fair, it was like COVID was going on. There's a lot of weird stuff that started happening with the world. And so politically and economically, it's like things got rough. And you have some group that's a very optimistic and positive bunch of people who are just building and sharing stupid memes and gifs and stuff. And it just gave a place to escape to that was a little bit different. So that's really what drove me to Smalls in the beginning, is just seeing that in contrast. You also had, like you were talking about, the very, very flippant and detached ideas around NFTs where it was just such a cash grab kind of thing, and you just put something out and create it, and then it exists in the space, and then they ditch it and they bail and then they go do another project, and then that's a
Right.
cycle of a lot of things. And in Smallverse stuff, it was about building. It was how can we create more value on top of smalls? How can we create and you got the small bodies that came out, and then the motorcycles and the games and the land, and like the evolution of that and how that could be integrated and what else could come to that, and then building from within the community a group that did all of that. And that's the part, is it's kind of like you crowdsourced something that was really already their interest. And it was smart. It was a lot of very smart moves. So I think that that drew me to Smalls. That was their kind of, I knew that I was going to be a forever small at that point. I have my orange one and that's mine and I will never sell it.
Very nice.
So
Yep, I know the feeling.
it's just how bad.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. But I got to actually, I was doing a lot of the pixel art stuff and translating it to 3D. So I don't know if you've seen some of those that I've done or not, but
I did.
I do it
Yep.
a,
That's what drew
yeah.
me. Is I saw you posting about some stuff. It was like it was a 3D small that looked really cool. And then there was like a
Yeah.
small, like working in a lab, and there was some backstory you said you were working on. I can't remember
Yeah.
what it was, but
Yep.
I remember it
Yep.
was intriguing.
Exactly. So one of the things I was doing in the beginning with Blender stuff and NFTs was just really messing around and trying to get my art out there by converting what I saw pixel things as and turning it into kind of a new version, but keeping the likeness and trying to keep it as similar as it could be to what the original pixel idea is. It's a very weird challenge because pixel stuff is so limited. You have 64 by 64 square, right? And you have to create so much detail to be able to communicate that to whoever's viewing it. So pixel art to me is fascinating in that idea in terms of creativity because it's literally using an extreme amount of limited space to try and communicate what things are.
Right.
Like a little pipe or a cigarette might be 2 pixels with a little red pixel at the
Yep.
end. Like it's just very minimalist kind of stuff, but you have to figure out how it's going to look and how it's going to fall. And then you add the generative bit to it where you have all the traits to kind of randomize. And it makes for an interesting thing. And I thought, how does that happen with 3D? And I was like, it's going to be different when you apply the generative piece. And I'll get into that probably a little bit later in this when I start talking about my own project. But related to smalls, it was just fun to put them together and piece them out and start to build some of these traits and actually see how those things were falling and how would I make this generative, so to speak. So I did the smalls just for fun on my own. I did the small bodies for fun on my own. There was a couple other pixel projects. I really like Smithy DAO, so I was a big Smithy guy. And so I did one of their weapons. I was in Lifers. I was in a lot of stuff. Small Sharks. I like a lot of the communities. Toadstools. I just could name drop all day,
Yep.
right? But the thing is, it was always so interesting for me because it just creates an endless supply of work in translating those pixel things. You could pick up any of them and try to make them into something else that has certain levels of detail or textures, or how would those eyes look if they were three-dimensional versus two-dimensional. So it was just an interesting thing to get into. And John actually reached out to me at one point, John Patton, and we were talking about what was the project at the time? It was the Wojak one. Enjoyers?
Okay.
That was the one I think
I'm
it
not
was.
familiar with it.
Yeah, they were in the process of building out a pixelated, it was like a generative thing that was going to be all of Wojaks basically. And that was something they were working on in the background. And I was creating some of the 3D files for the websites. There's a Wojak face that I made, and it's somewhere I posted a couple times, but it's actually manipulable and you could 3D rotate it and stuff on a
Oh,
website
neat.
page.
Okay.
And yeah, so I was working with their team and they're a crack up. Their group is so funny and John's such a good-hearted dude. He's really kind. He's very busy, but he's a good dude. And he ended up talking to me a lot about different projects I was making. And then he liked the Mooncats one I did at one point, and was talking to me about that. So I became a person that was talking to John a lot about what if with different projects and
Oh, very
ideas and
cool. I
all
didn't know
that.
that.
Yeah. And what ended up happening is I was thinking about putting together a storyline and a plot for Smalls. I didn't really have the group I needed to be able to build something out.
Okay.
So I wanted it to work differently than it actually did with Gloomy Doomers. So originally the idea for it was that my Small, the little one that escaped from jail, he had a storyline, and I actually built most of that in 3D where he escaped from jail. I made a Twitter account for Smallville Police Department,
Okay.
and they were gonna they were gonna chase and put out clues related to my dude.
Nice.
And then he was gonna be creating science experiments, and those science experiments were gonna be the NFTs that were coming out. So it was like a pickle in a jar, but it was like mutated or jalapeno in a jar thing.
Okay.
But yeah, but like super creepy and weird. So I was pitching this idea to John, and I was talking a little bit about, oh, I want to do these ERC 115s, 1155s to try and do a bunch of them, but never got to that point where we actually built it out and did everything. But I did like some of the cinematic stuff, and I like modeled out like the police department and all the people. And so I had this idea where there was a story, there was like multiple Twitters, it was going to be promoted from one Twitter to the other, kind of like people were going to do some looking for clues kind of
Yep.
things to figure it out before mint, that kind of stuff.
Yep. I
But
like
just
it.
to add and play on the game aspect and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. It's clever.
But yeah. So the whole idea behind it was that that my Small escape from jail, he was in a basement, and then he was originally arrested for experimenting on humans and pleacher or plants and fauna, whatever, but he was arrested for doing that.
Got it.
And so the whole idea was, oh yeah, he's gonna escape and create all these weird things, and he's back to it again, and he's the mad scientist guy, and that was gonna be my alias, was to use that. So yeah, went a different way where I just ended up creating creepy, weird NFTs anyway, just not tied to the direct community the same
Got
way.
it.
So
So tell me
yeah,
more about what you needed that you went off, because you said you didn't have the team in place to make it go the way you wanted to. So
yeah,
what were you missing, or what were you looking for that you couldn't find?
that's a good question. I think it might have been my own inability to navigate the space. Like I'm not a coder.
Mm.
Like I've done some code. I've taken like a Java class and I've taken some Python stuff and I've worked with friends on some of that, but I haven't ever learned coding myself. And I am someone who's very solitary typically, so I'm a one-man team a lot of the
Hmm.
time. I'm reluctant to reach out to people. So part of that is my own growth,
Okay.
right? Like me stepping on my own toes and getting in my own way with some of it. And then the other part of that is not really knowing how the pieces would even fall together or who would need to be in charge of that. So it's weird when you've got these ideas for something, but then you're going to make a bunch of technical people go and do the work,
Right.
and that always feels off because it's, I do have some technical skill, and I do know that it can be very quickly like you're asking way too much of somebody and you don't really understand the volume of work that you're requesting.
Okay.
So it was going to get to a point where I was like, we need to have this kind of thing in the contract for these kind of whitelists, and we need to be able to deposit and mint, and then we need to be able to, and I didn't know all of what that would entail.
That makes total sense. And interestingly enough, that's the problem I'm trying to solve with this show, is for the listener out there with the idea, with the desire to go and build something, but basically sounded like you were overwhelmed by it. Like just thinking of all of the things that you didn't know and not knowing where to start. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It was exactly that. It was not
Okay.
having the right footing and not having the ability to, one, know even like what the scope is. If you have a front end dev, is it 10 lines of code that they put in and then you can attach a Web3 wallet? Is it you pay them for 40 hours of work? I have no idea what the
Right.
scale of work is for some of this stuff. And so it was really hard to try and think about and source all that. And especially when you're doing something that's like a free mint, because all my stuff has been
Yeah.
free-ish. I'm trying
So you're
money off of
basically
it
just
at some
coming out of
point, but
pocket. Be a big
right.
deal.
And so Exactly, and it can really quickly add up,
Oh yeah,
but
it
I
does.
I am absolutely in the hole with creating NFT projects. Like, I am not making money, which is that's okay. Like, I enjoy making them for the sake of making them, but it's just something that's people getting into the space need to understand
Yeah,
that, and
that's a
there
definite
is an
limiting
upfront cost
factor,
to
if you
it.
will. And that's
Yeah,
basically what you ran into
totally.
there is you ran into what you felt was a limiting factor. So with that in mind, like
Exactly.
with that concept in mind and knowing that we've got a listener out here who is in that boat, as you progress through your story, just keep that in mind, to keep that person in mind, and let's point out the things that you learned along the way. So then let's take a step forward then as the next thing. Is it Doomy Gloomers?
Yeah, Gloomy
Gloomy
Doomers,
Doomer.
Gloomy
Sorry, I
Doomers.
busted up. So
Yeah,
let me
no, it's
say
all
this:
good. Yeah.
is when Verchi connected us on Twitter a couple months back, the first thing I did was click on Gloomy Doomers to look at the project, and I instantly loved it. You're those creepy little dudes. They're just so unique and so cool. I was like, oh, I want these right now. So as I'll say that as I love them, but let's transition to it. Like, how did you start moving towards that project?
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. It was a fun one to make, honestly. I always had this, I don't know, I like weird, creepy, kind of grotesque things, and I grew up with horror stories, and I love horror movies. I'm a big fan of all that, and that's my primary focus with a lot of my art. And trying to make something that's creepy and cute is strange, so that was my like attempt at it.
Mm-hmm.
And I still think that some of the stuff is probably a little too weird and deranged. There's some stuff that's too Tim Burton-esque for people,
Okay.
and they're like, "Nah, it's not really my
Yeah, I
vibe."
got.
And that's the thing is that's me. I like it. But no, Doomers came from I built out a couple different models actually for what Doomers was supposed to be. And when you go back to that OBLOMOV idea with the mad scientist situation in the basement building out those, part of that was, oh, he's going to be building these little toys or they're little voodoo dolls or there's something else. And that was one of the things he was working on was these weird little, basically like torture tools or torture toys, I
Torture
guess you'd
toys.
say. But yeah, but really messed up. So I wasn't sure what to name them or how to go about that. So I built out actually, they had like little wooden arms and they look different than Doomers actually do. But there was a bunch of those. And then what I ended up doing was they had the googly eyes and like different toy type components. So there were like some that had like toothpicks that were attached to them, and some were using like thumbtacks and like paper clips and anything that was small because I was trying to create some sort of proportion to it. Like they're going to be like a little crazy man's toys.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the idea behind it. But instead, that evolved into why not just do something creepy? And then I went to the zombie kind of idea, little demon dudes. And that's where I was like, yeah, I used to do little demon guys anyway, so let's just do that. And yeah, it branched off from there.
Gotcha.
I also think at the time there was other stuff going on with the Smallverse stuff where it wasn't that I had like a bad taste or disdain for them or anything like that, but I think John got busy doing other stuff as well. So because he got super quiet for a
Mm-hmm.
bit, and I was talking to him for a period, but it wasn't I don't remember what was going on exactly. I think it was during the time when they were looking at Small Coin coming out. And so there was a whole bunch of FUD and the back and forth around all that. I don't know if you remember that whole.
Wasn't here yet. Yeah, I missed all
Oh,
that. Yep.
okay, okay. Yeah, so that was a big annoying thing that really dragged the community down in a weird way,
Okay.
but it wasn't really anyone's fault. It was just like an idea that got put out, people got hyped on it, then when it didn't happen, people got disappointed.
Got it.
And then yeah, it became a who's going to get the small coin thing, and it was between small bodies and small brains, and they didn't know how to separate it, so they didn't do it at all. So it was a whole kind of ethical thing. It wasn't like oh poo poo on you situation, but it was definitely something that caused a lot of people to get
Yeah, a bit of a
disrupted,
vibe
a
change for
little bit
sure.
with the
That's one
yeah.
potential drawback to building with the community, right? That's ever if you give everybody a voice, then you can't listen to everybody, and then you haven't listened to some of your community, and there's huge benefits to doing it, obviously, but there are some potential problems you could run into, and I think that sounds like there might have been a little of that.
Exactly, exactly right. And that's honestly one of the reasons I wanted to go solo with my first project is I wanted to own all of my
Mm-hmm.
mistakes. It was part of if I do this with other people involved and if the art doesn't work out right or something doesn't go right with the IPFS and I already paid somebody and then they leave, what happens in those scenarios? Because then I'm bailed on and I'm the sole creator of a lot of the artwork,
Mm-hmm.
but people are pissed at me as a
Yep.
face. And it gets to this weird place where I wanted to take full responsibility. So everything I did and launched through Bueno, like I did the like generative contract thing and everything for Doomers. So that was the pieces. It was just like using all the platforms that were like all in one kind of
Yep.
tools, not doing it the best way for sure. but I wanted to take it on, and I wanted to be the person who owned those mistakes if there were mistakes made,
Okay.
if that makes
Yeah, no, it
sense.
totally
Yeah,
does. It totally
yeah,
does. I work that way
yeah,
myself sometimes.
yeah,
So walk me through it though. So what's the process? You mentioned Bueno as a tool. We've heard of that one on this show already before. I think
yeah,
that's what Thade from Primapes used to put
yeah.
that project together. But walk us through the whole process. You design these guys. I know you already said the platform you're designing it. Can you refresh me on that?
Yeah, so I use Blender
Blender.
as my
Got it.
primary software. Yeah, yeah, that's been my go-to. I do want to get into Unreal 5 because that's just the power of Unreal's engine is
Yep.
insane. But I'm familiar with Blender at this point, so I'm just in the thick of it, and I like it. And they keep putting out cool content, so Blender's my go-to for a lot of stuff.
Got it. So this is a generative
With
project. So I'm looking at one of my
Yeah,
favorite one that I have is this little blue guy. He's got like red globes for eyes, and he's got a meat cleaver jammed into his head, and he's bleeding down his forehead. And pretty unique thing is that meat cleaver like one of the generative components, and then that's a trait I might get as a meat
yeah.
cleaver in the head.
Yeah, it was interesting having to build it out because in a 3D environment, so I had looked at a couple different projects from 2020 that were 3D based. One was called Humanoids, and they were pretty rad, basically punks that were just made 3D. The creator for them did a really good job, really clean. And then there was another one, it was like Nixon something or others, I don't know, but I saw that some of the issues that some of these projects were running into is that they had difficulty with when you add 3D as a component, it's so much more difficult to make everything fall the right way on all the right forms.
Okay.
So if you mess with the head shape, every hat has to have not only like an X and a Y, but a Z axis as well, that and all have to fit accurately with every type of head or with every type
Interesting.
of eyebrow. So you have to actually, when I was creating Doomers, I think I ran the full 3,666 or whatever. I ran that full cycle of creating them probably 15 times and then running through and rendering out each one, which takes like days at a time, 3 days each.
Okay.
But I kept finding errors and I would find, oh, this one didn't connect right with the eye here. This one didn't connect right with
Interesting.
it. These glasses got in the way of these teeth, those kind of
Yep.
things. So it's like you can overlap and run into people or run into different things with the meshes. So it's hard. It's really hard to work with 3D in a generative kind of way, and you have to build everything out so that it all fits very similarly, or you're coding out conditions for everything.
Hmm.
But in terms of Blender, what it is, there's a actual code you can get from Git, and you can pull it down, and there's an add-on that you can add for Blender that does the generative component to it, and it takes some learning about how the add-on works and watching some tutorials and stuff on it, but basically you compartmentalize everything. So you put all your head items together. You put all your what I did was I put different skin types as their own. So I did acid wash or gray or blue or whatever tone
Hmm.
on your skin. And that was the generative normal part. And then I separated out all the bones and did those as their own colors. And I think I had 15 variations of each or something like that. And then the mouths, the weird part on the mouth was that you had to already have a hole cut in the head to make it so that there's depth there.
Hmm.
Because if you think about it, if you overlay a mouth, the mouth has to look either like it's closed so that the lips are big enough to actually fill the gap, or it has to look like it's open and actually have depth there. It can't just be skin behind the mouth,
Okay. Yep.
right? And so there's things that have to happen that are more nuanced and more specific with all the Doomer's traits. Really funky, but yeah. So basically, I went through, I had to create and build all these things out and really work through how it was going to generate randomly and what those issues would be, and then identifying all those before I even launched the project. Because I thought it would be really messy to say, oh, yeah, I'm going to launch this project out and then not have them all work. So I
Right.
wanted to make sure that it worked before actually moving forward with
Okay.
that. So
Gotcha.
yeah, so that was one of my things. I've seen it done a lot of other ways now, and being someone who created their own project, I don't like when a project comes into the space and says, "Oh yeah, we got this one artwork we're going to show everybody and it looks perfect." And then they're going to either have issues with the generation component and then things come out later where they're like, "Oh, we generated some and these traits don't work with these, so we got
Yep.
to wait longer for the reveal." Those
That
those kind of
explains a
things are
lot, though. Yeah,
catastrophic.
what you're
Yeah.
explaining, like that explains some of those big long delays where everybody starts hollering like, "This is a rug. You guys are. This is a scam.
Yep.
You never intended to
Yep.
do this. You just took all our money." But they might be back there
Exactly.
trying to like realizing that, oh shoot, we gotta do something about the skin behind the mouth. We didn't think about that. This is a
Yes,
big deal.
exactly. Exactly
Yeah.
right. Exactly right. Or if the horns are running into the glasses or different weird stuff can go on with all of
Yep.
them. And so you have to run it through and run into those combinations and then correct for
Yep.
them and do that again and again and again and again. And that's the refinement process for a lot of it. But it was a lot of the first step is really just building out the ideas that you want on
Mm-hmm.
things and all the different traits that you want, organizing all of those, then organizing them all so that it works with the code because you have to name everything
Mm-hmm.
correctly. And then after you do all that, you run it a million times to see if it actually fits. And when it doesn't, then you fix things and fine tune pixel by pixel, little tiny new nitpicky stuff to build out all the Doomer combinations and everything. And all of those meshes are built from scratch. It starts with a cube generated in the middle of the screen and you manipulate the environment. So it's everything is built from scratch. I didn't import anything for this
Okay.
model or anything in Doomers. But to build everything out from scratch took about 3 months.
Okay.
So of just building meshes, not actual iterations, not running the script or anything like that, not even looking at hosting, none of that.
Okay.
But just building out the meshes took about 3 months of time.
Got it.
And I was working full time, but it was something I was doing literally every day I got off work, and then I had weekends, and that was it
Got
too.
it.
Yeah,
So it
yeah.
was
But
so not a small task. And then so
no,
from there, so you got your meshes all built out, and then you got to do kind of the generations and the debugging, if you will. Do you say
yep.
it takes 3 days to generate?
Yeah, so rendering the 3D so that there's a 10 kilobyte or 10 megabyte limit for what is the size of these actually? I don't even know. I think it's 10 kilobyte. Can't remember honestly. But if whatever size it is, it took about I think it was I did 2,000 passes for everything and I did double the normal resolution, so 2080 something, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I basically had doubled up a lot of my resolution on stuff because I wanted all the details to show. So I wanted light to show, wanted the details in the teeth and like the bone. And because I set all these textures, I did all these things I wanted to show up in the work. But you also have to comply with the file size
Yep.
limit. So it was how do I make it so that it's still smaller? Because 3D work is massively heavier than pixel stuff.
Okay. Oh
So I was
yeah, I
talking to
could imagine.
Commonopoly. Yeah, Commonopoly, by the way, he used Bueno too. So he and I are buddies and he's awesome. But he helped me with that launch through Bueno. So
Gotcha.
Commonopoly was one of the people who pointed me in the right direction for how to do all that. But I was talking to him at the time and I was like, oh, it's taken me 6 days to generate out all these things for my project. And he was cracking up and he's like, commoners took 2 minutes,
Yeah,
five
sure.
minutes, something like that to generate. Yeah.
Slightly
So you get
different output for
that's
sure. Yeah,
yep,
I'm looking at
yep,
this thing. This whole
exactly.
time we're talking, I'm like staring at this and like the depth, like you're talking about. I could see it. Like his eyebrows very much have this very distinct depth to them, and I could see all the little
Yep,
hairs and the blood
yep,
that's running down his head is like at least 3 different shades of red, and you could see the light
yep,
reflecting in it. There's a lot going on here, and even just the texture of his head is his head's not smooth. It's like
right.
it's bumpy. It's skin,
Yep,
right?
yep, yep,
There really is. I can see as you're describing this. I'm sitting here going through and looking at all of these little details, and there really is a
yep.
lot going on here. So that is no surprise. It took a long time to render it.
Yeah, yeah, and it was fun to do. I and it was like the file size, it would take 10 minutes to load on my computer when I open it in the day because it was
Yep.
just there's so much data in there. And if I opened it with render view open, it was like my computer's going to explode. So there was times when I had to like put everything down to basically just wireframe just to be able to like work with all the dynamic meshes and stuff. But there's a lot in here as far as time with texture, color, paint. The way Blender works with textures is really cool, and it's just a beautiful software to use that with. So you can find tutorials on like how to create bone, how to create leather, all that
Hmm.
kind of stuff. And that's part of what I did here. But I did all that for different projects in the past. And this is like the culmination or the first real attempt at bringing all that together
Got it.
is what Doomers
Very
was.
cool.
Yeah,
Very
yeah,
cool. Yeah, I assume you need a pretty powerful PC running this thing too. I imagine you said you had a
yeah,
specific
yep.
rig for it.
Yeah, I got a 3090 and then yeah, RTX and then I have a ultra wide screen that's massive and so I use this whole setup and my graphics card screams like it literally like yells at me while I'm doing stuff, but it is a beast, man, but I love this setup right now.
Got it.
So it works.
Okay.
It works.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And real quick, I
Yeah.
noticed too, I mentioned the meat cleaver has had the trait that goes with that is headache, by the way, which I
Yeah.
like. That's good.
Yeah, I tried to add some sass into it, man. I
Yeah.
was like, yeah, there's some good stuff in there for
Like,
sure. I tried to be creative with it. I did give nods to some of the small stuff as well. There's like an alien relic shoulder pad in there.
okay.
Yeah, so I had more small traits that were built, but I didn't necessarily want to make this like a small project because
Yeah.
it went a different
Yep.
way. So it wasn't, again, it wasn't like a slight against them, but it also wasn't trying to cash grab based on
Yep.
smalls. I was
Gotcha.
not trying to like, so I didn't want to go, oh yeah, we got all the same traits as smalls, we're just different.
Yeah.
It's no, that's not really creative or that cool. It's just its own thing. So instead I went with customized little demon guys. That
Yeah.
was really it. So
I gotta get some
yeah,
more of these.
yeah.
I'm looking through them right now. I'm looking at one. This guy's like a charcoal black. He's got a blue mohawk, flames coming off the
Yeah,
shoulders. With the he's eating a piece of pizza. His eyes are closed. It's just
right.
there's a lot going on here. I love it. All right.
It's really fun, man. And I know something that probably put people off was the satanic vibe. And I don't know how religious everyone is in the community, some people more than others. I am not religious. I am an atheist. So that is just my
Yep.
core. I don't know what everyone else's beliefs are, and I know
I
some of
was
this
raised
weird stuff.
Catholic, my dude, and it doesn't bother me one little bit.
Yeah.
I'm fine.
Yeah, good, good. That's
Yep.
awesome.
No,
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
I just
I
it appeals to me with its weirdness. I enjoy it.
good.
So tell me,
Yes.
so you got all this rendered. Now you got to take it from there into like how do you turn this into an NFT collection and actually deploy it? Walk me through the rest of that process.
Yeah, so Bueno does a really good job of it with hosting and making it easy as far as like a cookie cutter kind of process for it. The way you do it is if you run the script in Blender, it'll spit out your JSON files that come with each corresponding image. So what'll happen is when you run the script in Blender, you'll get a massive file that has all the images with all the name convention that you set, and then you'll get a file, another folder full of the metadata that you need that corresponds with each one. The way that you have to put it into Bueno is you have to compress that all the JSON files into basically one massive JSON. And then that's one of the weird parts about Bueno. It just uses it differently. So metadata gets processed differently on Bueno. But that being said, Bueno hosts their own images. One of the issues I had was that some of them weren't ever revealing. So I did have an issue with a couple NFTs. I think it was maybe like 2% of them that were just not revealing through Bueno.
Hmm.
And it took a while, but I do have a friend that hosts his own server. And Adarev, he's one of the guys that's one of our devs too, but he ended up hosting them. And so I helped him out with the subscription fee for that. But he is now hosting all those locally.
Okay.
So we moved over and we migrated the IPFS off of Bueno, and that fixed that issue. But it does take time to
Gotcha.
get that
Now, when you're
resolved.
setting
And
it up
yeah,
in Bueno, are you loading the already generated art, or are you
correct,
loading all the
correct.
components and it's doing the generative part?
Nope. Yeah. So I did the whole thing.
Okay.
So you can do it. I think you can do it both ways. I think there's a way to do it where you have like actual traits that you're uploading one by one, but I spit out the JPEGs from Blender
Got it.
directly with it already processed, and then you upload those to the
Yeah,
Blender.
given what you've
And then
already
yeah,
described, that makes sense to me because that probably gave you the opportunity to do a little bit of final review and make sure you were happy with the
yeah,
output. Whereas if you put all the components
exactly.
up and like crossed your fingers and hoped that Bueno did it the same way, it probably wouldn't have on some level somewhere.
Right,
Okay,
right.
that makes sense.
Exactly. Exactly. Yep. Yep. And it's just with that size of stuff too, thinking about having to have internet open while it's generating these traits out, if it was even doing that, would
Mm,
just be such a monster
okay.
thing to have the internet. Think about each individual trait having to generate however many
Yep.
times, and then they're creating the image
Yep.
file.
That
It
would
would just
be
take
a lot of
forever.
processing. Yeah.
Yep. So you upload all of it, then you give them one file that's got all the JSON data in sequence, and then that uploads, and it worked fine. It took a little bit of troubleshooting, but it maybe a day or two to get Bueno figured out,
Okay.
and then it was working.
Got it.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
when you launch this thing, were you selling
Yeah.
them unrevealed then? So some people are going to come and mint and they're going to get one of those at random, and Bueno's going to handle all
I
that.
think we did it. I think we did reveal was instant actually with this. And it's a button you can click if you wanted to do it with Bueno. I set it to the absolute lowest price I could for this mint. I think it was like 60 cents, 30 cents, something like
Okay.
that. So less than the gas
Yep.
fee to mint it, which is the minimum price that they can set on Bueno. So it's the closest to free that's possible on Bueno. But one of the things I would do if I was going to do it again is I would actually probably have a price there because we definitely got attacked. I mean, our mint got taken. And so once the list was done and we had maybe 1,000 people that minted, we had 2,000 that just went off into addresses that were just going to dump.
Okay.
And that, yeah, and that was something that was really a pain because I was like, oh, good, just tons and tons of sell volume
Right.
with no one that's really interested in any of
Yep.
this. And it's because I honestly believe that people at Bueno snipe those projects. I think that they do see it and they see it
Ah,
first, and
okay.
so they have the ability to do that. So that is something, it's a risky run, right? Yeah, we minted out, that was cool, but also sweeping the floor and making sure that it's all caught up. Like I used any money I made to sweep up everything that was back and just gave it to the dev fund
Ah,
and then
okay.
did giveaways with the rest of it. So I'm pretty sure I got rid of all the Sybil wallets, but I don't even know, to be
Got it.
honest, at this point.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So,
what would you have done differently? Would you have controlled the whitelist more, or you just set the price
it's
higher,
hard.
or
It's hard to say, right? And I think that part of it is hype. So you need the right group of people who's all interested. So I would do a free mint absolutely if I could like over allocate the right. If I had, say, 5,000 people that were just hitting me up and were like, yes, we're getting this no matter what, I would do it free still, but do it all through a list. If I was going to do it through a paid mint or trying to actually like make money on a project at all, you need to have volume and you need to have hype to really drive it.
Mhm.
And if you don't have the marketing, and that's the thing is I really don't like marketing. Like I hate the reaching out and doing. I basically learned like what hats I do and don't like to
Yeah, sure.
wear,
Yep.
in this process. But yeah, yeah. But the marketing piece is rough, and I really don't like how the general NFT community markets because it's so much shilling. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah. There's a lot
flame
of just
emojis and
hype and
rockets and moons, and
mhm.
then and I'm sitting there just trying to create something cool that people enjoy
Yep.
it. So it has so much less to do with the Moon Lambo situation and more to do with getting your stuff out there and just launching something cool and seeing what comes of
Yeah,
it.
right on.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So that being said, yeah, that's kind of my input. I definitely wouldn't go through Bueno aside from like an initial mint or if it's something that you're not really like your heart's really in, because I just think it can get sniped easily.
Okay.
And I think that it's just too easy to see that on their back end. And not to say that they don't have integrity or anything like that, but you just never know. It's the trust but verify,
I
right?
gotcha.
And I just don't really like that idea of anytime you have a central service like that, they can have access to all of your stuff before it gets
Yeah,
really
no, it's a fair
launched.
point. It
So,
just is a
yeah,
fact. That's something that you're
right,
getting with that
right.
centralization, and
Yep,
there's
yep.
some
So what you
benefits
really
to it,
need,
but you're gonna get some
yeah.
potential drawbacks too.
And what you really need is a community that's so one, you need a team that can build out a front end, can build out a back end and a contract, and then someone creating the art that and that's the first core piece of it. But then beyond that, you need actual marketing and people engaged and a community built around that idea. Because if there's no interest and traction in the idea, then it's really not worth doing in the first place.
Yeah,
It's kind
that's
of
fair.
like yeah, it doesn't really stick. I don't know. It's a fun experiment, but I don't know that it got the traction I would have liked it to have at all. It's there, but we'll see. You never know how like some of these things turn up in a year and they become more
Yeah,
interesting, in time.
yeah. No,
So
I gotcha.
who knows? But all my Doomer people are going to be my forever NFT people. So that's where I do the airdrops. That's where I do like my snapshots, all that stuff. So anything I do for future projects will always be Gloomy
There you
Doomer
go. That's cool. It's cool to have
specific.
that like
Yeah.
home base project, if you will.
Yep.
All right.
Yep. That's
So
exactly
tell
right.
me then from there. So you learned a bunch on this, and it was obviously good enough that you went and did it again because you launched another
Yeah.
project not that long ago.
Yep.
So tell me about the path to project number two.
Yeah, so that one started, it was a little bit different. I was trying to go that other way, much smaller mint supply. We're doing a zero point 0.01 mint. It was free for the people who were on the whitelist through our Doomers Discord. So we did a brief, I think it was like 250, 300 people, something like that, that were on the whitelist for that, who signed up for it. And then we were going to have them mint out for that. The launch with the contract was a little bit weird. We had a couple different bugs that were going on with the contract. So I think that honestly, I feel like the littlest mistake can throw off a launch, like for anything. It's just such a funny thing how quickly it can fall apart. But I liked the idea of the bugs. I think they're interesting. I think it's weird having a model for something that's black and white and 3D, and then also has like a random gold
Mm-hmm.
kind of implementation to it. So bugs were actually originally demons, like they were straight demons. They used to draw these little sharp, pointy demon things. And so I showed a couple people in Discord and my friends, and they were like, those look like insects. And I was like, interesting. And so that evolved into looking at different kinds of insects, and I was like, insects are terrifying. I was like, if you ever
The
look at their
close-ups
faces,
are
they're
nuts of
horrible.
insects. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I was trying to capture with this, was some of that weird kind of look. And it does have the Tim Burton kind of vibe to it for sure. But yeah, that's there. And they're still available to mint. Like they're open. I think they're 0.01 ETH each, something like that. But we just kept them out there. And so they're there. They're revealed upon mint. And that's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
did not
Yeah.
use Bueno for this
No,
launch.
not
So
yeah.
did you
Yeah.
guys just do all the contract yourself and do all that
Yep,
code
yep. So
yourselves?
Stinky did the
Okay.
contract. Yep, Stinky did the contract. Adarev did the IPFS hosting. So yeah, we had those two folks that were my go-tos for a lot of that. But yeah, so everything's locally hosted right now by Adarev, and that being is that he now what happens is you don't have people who can snipe the IPFS, so people can't look for one-on-ones and say like I'm going to mint the next one. So he can host it locally until they mint out. If they ever mint out, and then they can switch it over to public.
Oh, okay. That's a good
Yeah,
idea. Just,
yeah,
yeah. So there is no kind of
yeah.
sneaky vector, if you will. Okay.
Exactly.
That's good. I
Exactly.
never really
Yeah.
even thought
Yeah.
about that before. That's
Yeah.
definitely something people should be thinking about along the way here.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other kicker too, something I forgot to add was that launching a contract on Ethereum is so much more expensive than on Arbitrum. So using something like Bueno for Ethereum makes a lot of sense because it does the building for you and it puts the gas fees and all that in place for you. So you don't really have the same cost with launching on Bueno. Versus if you think about having to have like a staking method and a mint method and all these different things that you're building out, you're paying gas to launch that contract as well, which is a little bit insane. My contract that I launched on Doomers was not expensive at all. I think it was $50, something like that. But the one we launched on Arbitrum was like $1. Like by
Yeah.
comparison, it's like it's so much cheaper to just do every transaction kind of thing on Arbitrum versus through mainnet.
Yeah.
But that being said, for our projects, yeah, I think launching something in the future on Arbitrum is going to be like the core. Any level twos, I just think that mainnet is so, and if you're just getting into building a project and you're just starting out, it's of course nice to hope that you're going to have a mainnet, project that's blue chip and all these, like that's a grandiose hope, right? But the reality is that if and when that doesn't happen, you're spending a lot more money on trying to figure it out on mainnet
Right.
than trying to resolve things on a level two.
Yeah, that's a
So,
fantastic point. Just the cheapness of the experimentation itself allows you to have some mess ups. The
right.
other thing too is we just went through shitcoin season with 200 gas on mainnet for an
Yes.
extended period of time, man. That was like a month
Yeah.
where basically I didn't want to do anything on mainnet.
Same.
And
Same.
like if you were planning to launch your project during that period and you had all of your timing, your marketing, your everything all set to go, you might have been
Yeah.
screwed. And
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
can and will happen again. It's a little bit out of
Right.
your control.
And that happened to people. I was a part of a project that did that recently where they had something go on with their contract. They were on mainnet. They did a paid mint. The art was pretty
Hmm.
good. It's something it's a studio that's out there. I'm not going to name drop right now, but they had a good idea and they had to relaunch everything, but then they wanted the people to mint off the new contract. And when gas is that high, you're basically paying more than your initial
Yep.
fee. If you paid 0.01, you're paying 0.02 again per thing to
Yep.
mint. It's just
And then if you
insane.
want to move
And
it to a
people
different
become
wallet or
pissed.
something, you're paying again. And
Right,
it's, yeah,
right.
it's absurd.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Exactly. So from the risk angle, it's just there's so much less risk associated with launching on a level two and just trying it out and figuring it out from there and then going forward. But if you run into complications, I think that really mainnet stuff should be for things that are like ironclad. Like when you have your A team and you have your group together that you know is going to launch a project and they're going to be killing it, that's when you go to mainnet for it.
Okay.
And you can like you pay that upfront fee because you're going to get the
I was going
volume
to say,
there.
because
You
you're
will
going
get
for
the
the
NFT
audience
volume
there
there.
is why, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But until then, your idea is probably not as good as you think it is, which is the unfortunate
That's
reality. And
so.
I've learned that multiple times. It's just true.
Yeah.
It's just true, and it's unfortunate, but it's a reality where you're like you got to approach from a realist angle of this is, I think, something that's just a better option for experimentation.
Yeah. Yeah, right on. No, that
Yeah,
I totally buy into that, and that's coming from you having done the first one on Ethereum, second one on
yeah,
Arbitrum, trying different tool
correct.
sets and things like that. And you're saying you do a level two again for the next one.
Yeah,
Okay, that's a great perspective for any potential artist, NFT founder, whatever, to be taking here as they're planning things out. So what's next for
Totally.
you? Do you have anything else in the works? Anything planned right now?
I was overwhelmed with work lately, so I got into a slump there. I left that job actually 2 weeks ago, and I am in the process of building out a couple different things. I was looking at going into more actual, like high level detail, pseudo animated, maybe tilt shift kind of stuff, but 3D. And I'm looking at going on to a super rare platform versus actually just doing the generative component thing. There's a couple pieces that, like my tattoo sleeve, is stuff that my brother drew, and my brother passed away about 5 years ago. So I was thinking about doing work that was dedicated to him and just coming together with some really cool artwork pieces more than just trying to get a profile picture kind of
Okay,
thing.
gotcha.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yes,
thinking about doing
work
that.
those artistic muscles, man. Just create.
Yeah,
I gotcha. That's good.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I'm always looking to build stuff though. And anytime anyone needs help with learning Blender, or if people have ideas that they want to get out and they're like, hey, how would I build this? I'm happy to always chat with people. So
That's awesome. And it's at crypto OBLOMOV, right? Is the Twitter
yeah,
handle? Yeah, we'll
correct.
link that
Yep.
down below. I assume that'd be the way for someone to reach out to you.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, perfect. Yeah.
All right,
Yeah. And
awesome.
then I got a link tree set up there, and they can go in to email me, they can reach out on Instagram, whatever else. Totally fine.
Awesome. I
Yeah.
say check out the projects too, guys. The Colony is the new one. That's the bugs. And
Yeah.
Gloomy Doomers is
Yep.
the first one, which is awesome. I love them both. And I own a handful of both of them. Nice job. I appreciate it very much. And thank you for coming on to share about it, man. It's cool. I love getting the backstory. You took us down into a level of detail on the creation process too that I wouldn't even know to ask those questions. So that was super helpful. I think the listeners will
Yeah.
get a lot out of that. I appreciate it, man.
No problem. It's been a pleasure being here. And thank you for the time, man. I'm glad we finally got to meet.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was worth the wait.
Yes, yes. If you want me to come back for anything in the future, let me know. Okay.
Yeah, I may take you up on that.
All
All
right,
right, sir.
sounds good,
Thanks
man.
for the time. Have a great one. To the listener, we'll see you next
too.
time on Ready Layer 2. Thank you for listening to Ready Layer 2. If you're an Arbitrum builder with a story to share, then hit me up on Twitter at GitSmall, GITSMOL. Learn more at gitsmall.com.